Hello, welcome to the May 14th, 2024 Club Cubase livestream. My name is Greg Undo and I'm the host of the livestream today. If you have not attended a live stream before, how it works is you could ask questions in the live chat field, or you could submit questions in advance by sending an email to clubcubase@steinberg.de. When asking questions, realize that my ability to answer all the questions in real time will probably soon be eclipsed, and we will go through and answer each of the questions chronologically as they're asked. So if you do not see an immediate response to your questions, if we could avoid asking the same question over and over again, that would be appreciated. Just kind of slows down the whole process. When asking questions, if you could specify which level of Cubase you're running, whether it's Cubase Elements, AI, LE, Artist, or Pro. Also, if you could specify if it's version 12, 13, etc., and which operating system. That information is helpful. We should have an index of all the topics covered in the live stream today pinned to the top of the comments field with timestamps. So if you wanted to go back and look for all the questions, and if you wanted to search for all the times for all topics that have been covered in previous live streams, you can go to cubaseindex.com. And we want to thank Jan for creating that website. I think there's about 33,000 topics that have been covered there. We also want to give special thanks to Jazz Dude and Agent K, who serve as moderators. So they're not Steinberg employees. They do this kind of out of the goodness of their hearts to make it a better community experience. So we'll give special thanks to them. We'll also give kudos to Jazz Dude for his efforts with the unofficial Cubase Nation Discord, which is a wonderful resource of information for people in the Steinberg community. So once again, my name is Greg Undo. I work for Yamaha Corporation of America, which is the U.S. distributor of Steinberg products, and I'm presenting from outside of Washington, D.C., in Alexandria, Virginia. And if you're watching this live, please feel free to introduce yourself and tell us where you're from. And with that, we will go ahead and get started. All right, so we see Peter sending greetings from Montreal. Thanks for joining us. We have Braxel from Texas, I believe. And his question is, if I update it from Cubase 12 Pro to 13 Pro, can I delete 12 Pro without issues? After I do that, can I reinstall Pro 13 and keep all my settings? If not, how can I save them? I hope I could still open my saved sessions. So yeah, there's no problem. Your sessions are completely compatible. I think that the actual, you can, once you install Cubase 13 and open it up, it's going to extract the preferences and all of your settings automatically from 12 and copy it over to 13, even like your list of recent projects, stuff like that would automatically carry over. If you wanted to make sure that everything from 12 was preserved, what you could do is go to the edit menu and go to Profile Manager and export your profile and simply save that as a file. And then you could import that into version 13. But once you have 13, if you want to uninstall version 12, you can. You could reinstall it and all of the settings will be intact because it's stored in a different location than what we have so that when you uninstall, those program settings are not uninstalled with the program. All right. We have a question from Roland Stuff from Sussex, England. This question is, hi Greg, I've recorded a MIDI part in Iconica Sketch and I want to change the articulation dynamics of individual notes, so vibrato and a couple of notes followed by some legato notes. But when I put the part into the lower editor to make those changes, the articulations/dynamics lane is blank. I know you can change a whole part with Iconica Sketch, but it's just the notes that I want to alter. Okay, so let's say if we have, this is all Iconica Sketch here. So now we'll just have our violin. So we go to the articulations and dynamics. So we have this and it's kind of showing up blank probably. So what you need to do is in the editor, go to the expression map tab right here and just say import key switches. Then since it's running inside of Hallion, we could see the articulation map. So at this point, we could say, okay, I want this to be legato. So we could just kind of come over here. And I want these to be staccato, coming right here for these shorter notes. And we'll go back to legato. Let me just so now we can start off legato. Switch the articulation here. And I want these to be pits or spiccato, you know. So we could just come over. So probably what you need to do is in the expression map, if it's blank, just choose to import the key switches, or if you see the key switches right there, you can set it like so. All right, we see Tim K says, glad to be joining once again from Zeist in the Netherlands. Great to see Sable Winters on. She's like number 16. All right, we have Uno Momento just saying hi from Finland, where it is 20 degrees. It says summer is coming. All right, wonderful to see Jan from Stockholm. Okay, so we see from Cycling is awesome. What is the best way to create group stems for a mastering studio? If I export a group of stems while muting all others, I lose the sidechained effects. For example, if I have the bass and drum kick in different groups. All right, so let's give it a shot. Okay, so I'm going to take my drums and we'll send a group channel to the drums, and I want a separate group channel to the bass. Okay, so let's say we want to compress the bass from the kick drum. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a listen to this. Okay, so let's say we have our bass here. And I'll just adjust the gain of the bass up here so we can. Okay, so we have the sidechain going on. So let's say I want to export both my, I'll do just a small section. So let's export my audio mix down, and I want to do my group channels. All right, and I'm gonna just enable my groups and sends here, and let's create audio tracks. Sorry, I had that channel record enabled. Do it one more time. Okay, so let's listen to so you could hear the sidechain is still working. So, and I think that this might have changed in, depending which version, like in 12, I believe that the sidechain was automatically going to be included. So if you're running version 11 or 12 or 11 or earlier, you may not notice the difference, but let's say if we just go back and forth. So that's the bass. So you can hear the sidechain. This is the rendered sidechain file versus the original bass. So the original file without any processing. Now you can hear the sidechain from the kick affecting the bass tone of that. So, but make sure that you're running, I think it was 12 when the sidechain was implemented with the rendering, but let me know if that makes sense for you. All right, so we have our question from Cycling is Awesome. Is there a way to vary velocity in MIDI tracks automatically so that each note has a slightly different velocity? So if you want, you could go to the Project Logical Editor, or I'm sorry, the Project Input Transformer. And all we would have to do is say, okay, we want to take MIDI notes. And what we want to do with the MIDI notes is we'll take our velocity, and then we could set to relative random values. So here we could choose, let's say, -10 to 10. And at this way, every time that we go to a MIDI track, so if I add a MIDI or instrument track, as soon as we come over here, we would see our input transformer, and then we could choose to follow the project. And this way we could just take your velocity. So you could set, if you wanted to be within, 10 velocities up or down based on your input. So you could just randomize the velocity like that. So once again, go to project input transformer, type is equal to note. In the event transform actions, velocity, set relative random values, and then you could set the variance in your velocity right there. Great to see Jazz Dude on. And we see Benny from Sweden. Thanks for joining again today. We see Robbie Bowling from Dallas, Texas. All right, wonderful to see Kerwin Young from Atlanta, Georgia, member of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, an all-around great composer. All right, we have John Costigan checking in from Kenosha, Wisconsin. Marcos Castro from San Jose, California. We have Home Studio World checking in from Jordan. All right, so we have the artist known as Love saying hello to everyone, and thanks for everything, Greg. Thank you for the kind words. All right, so we see many thanks, Greg. Can you show me fast and easy way to convert a single note in piano roll to minor or major chord in one click? Thanks. Okay, so let's take a look. Okay, so I think we could do this in the project logical editor, or the MIDI logical editor rather. Okay, so let's say we want to just draw in some chord. We'll draw in single notes here. Okay, so let's take a look. So you want to take this C note and be able to select a single note, make it a major or minor chord. So let's go to MIDI, to logical editor to set up. And I think we want to, I think it's maybe insert. Let's see, or insert exclusive. So we'll say type is equal to note. And we'll say pitch is going to be add, we'll say for minor chord. So let me just select this. Okay, so we want to choose insert and okay, so let me see if we can, we had to do this as macro, so let's say Okay, so I'm going to save preset here. We'll say add minor third. Right, and now I want to save changes as presets. So I'm going to switch this to 4, and we're going to say add major third. Okay, so let's build macros using those. So we'll come over here to our key commands. We're going to do a new macro. Okay, so we're going to go to my process logical editor presets. I'm going to add the command. Then we add a major third. Now I'm just going to make kind of the same macro and just reverse the function. So I duplicated the macro. Okay, so let's say now I select and delete this note here. And let's execute the macro. Okay, so we're going to say single note to minor chord. Okay, and then we run the macro. We do that. Let's select the next. So if we undo that, and then we can say single note to, we should just call this major. And now we could just kind of go back and forth between those two. So you could actually trigger a MIDI keyboard with the MIDI remote to switch between those. But that's how you could do it. There may be a faster way, but that's one quick way. So now you could select this particular note. Let's go to the key commands, to the macro. Okay, I want this to be the minor chord. And you could just kind of go on from there. So again, in the logical editor, under MIDI, you just create different conditions to add a major third and minor third and stack them in a macro to make a major or minor chord. All right, so we have Zai Fernando checking in from Oslo. Thanks for joining us. Great to see Soren from Sweden. All right, so we have Watch Addicts 12, says Mark Meter, Little Rock, Arkansas. I have a question. I'm running 11 Pro on i5 Mac, 32 gigabytes of RAM. OS is Monterey. I'm done at Monterey. Do I get 13 Pro expecting that 14 Pro will equal Ventura? So it's always hard to know what future programs will be working on future operating systems. I would say that probably if what I would suggest you do is, download the trial version of Cubase 13 and see how it runs on your, on your system. I think it will run in Ventura. I sometimes get all the Mac OS versions kind of mixed up since they change it every year with another name. But I think you'll be okay. But you could always, what I would always suggest is just running the trial version and see how that's going to work. I think that 13 Pro and 14 Pro, we don't know when 14 is coming out, so I can't really speculate as to what operating systems will be incompatible and kind of cut off by Apple at that point, because that could happen for outside of our perspective as well. So, but try to see if the 13 Pro would work, and then probably if 13 Pro works, more than likely 14 Pro will as well. All right, so Home Studio World asks, thank you again, Greg. Can you please show us how an automatic way to route chosen MIDI multi-instruments in Halion 7 to MIDI tracks without using manual method per instrument? Okay, so if we're doing a new project, and we'll start, and we want to do a multi-instrument starting with Halion 7, so we'll go to our instrument track. We'll say Halion 7. Okay, so let's say I want kind of a multi-instrument. Okay, so right now when we look at our inspector, we can see that this is going to be our instrument track that's routed through Halion 7 on channel 1. So if I wanted to now add MIDI tracks, so we'll add MIDI tracks. I'm going to start this at channel 2, and I want to add, let's say, 12. So now that we've done that, our MIDI tracks will automatically carry over to Halion 7 port A, the same MIDI port. And as we chose, since we had channel 1 already, I'm going to start with channel 2, that as we select down, we can see that the channels here will automatically just increment automatically. So let me know if that's kind of what you wanted to see. All right, so we see from Watch Addicts 12 says Mac won't let me download Ventura, and I'm done buying $6,000 Macs. Yeah, I understand kind of the frustration of being kind of shut out. Sorry about that. All right, so we have Renee checking in from Dachau, Germany. I'm sure I pronounced that incorrectly, but thanks for joining us. We see from Roland Stuff, says, hi Greg, thanks for explaining how to find the articulations in the lower window just now. These live streams are so helpful. I'm glad they're helpful. All right, we have Rob checking in from Tarpon Springs, Florida. Thanks for joining us again. Very loyal user, loyal attendee. All right, Patrick asks, hi Greg, is it possible to copy MIDI CC data in a region selection and paste them to a different selection, for example, to a spot later in a track without entering the key editor, MIDI logical editor? Okay, so let's say I have an event here. Just do my fantasy composition here. Okay, and we want to, let's say we have expression here. So I'm not sure if you're copying. All right, so I'm not sure if you want to select. Most of the time I would choose to copy within the editor. But if you don't want to do that, let's see if we could do it in a logical editor. So obviously if you're doing it in the editor, you could copy, move over here, paste, and it's very easy within the editor. But let's see if we could do it in the logical editor, or where we could copy with the MIDI CC data within the loop. So we'll come over here to our logical editor, and we want to copy. Type is equal to controller. So I'm not sure if you want to do all controllers or not, but we could specify a specific controller, and we want to choose the position is inside the cycle. So if I want to adjust it inside, I can say, okay, let's copy this. All right, so this way we've copied it to entirely different track. So let me select. All right, so now I just manually copied it, and let's come here. All right, so let's save this as a preset and see if we can do it within the macro. Okay, we'll come over to macros. All right, so we'll come over here to our logical editor. Okay. So we'll give this a try. So, you know, I could probably spend more time doing it, but you know, to me, it's like, you know, if you're absolutely dead set on not doing it within the editor, but this is, you know, like to select the CC and copy and paste, I think is super fast and easy. Let me know if you don't want to just open up the part. I could spend some more time working on it, but it seems like we could. Try it one more time with the macro. Yep, it looks like that worked. So if you want to do it, so again, we made the logical editor. So we can see that it just pasted that in. So if you want to set the cycle around the range to specify the range without going into the MIDI editor, and again, we go to MIDI to the logical editor, and I just chose to select controller information inside the cycle, and then we copied, and where I had the cursor here, at that point, that's where it gets pasted to. So I'll just make sure, say we come here, so we look, we can see our MIDI CC data here. If I did this right, you can see that's just the CC data is just copied and pasted over. So let me know if that works for you, Patrick. I think it's probably still faster within the editor, but. All right, so we have Ivan asks from Ukraine, says Cubase 13, Greg, is it possible to have folder tracks in the mixer or to have a shortcut for visibility of group tracks? Cheers. All right, so let's say, all right, I'll just go back to this project where we have, let's say I have folders here, and let me just, I'll add another group here. So, you know, when we have folders are more organizational because folders can contain a lot of different elements that are not set up for that pass audio. So I'm going to add a group channel to these tracks. I'll make this project active first. That would help. Okay, so I'm going to add a group to my guitars. So we have 3 groups. Okay, and we'll call it group 1. We'll rename to drums. Okay, so when I go into, sorry, I hate that Mac OS function. Okay, so let's say, first off, if we want to just come over here, if I only want to see group channels, you know, you could just pick and choose, okay, I just want to see group channels. Okay, or if I want to see all of my channels, we could do it like that. Now, one thing that a lot of people don't necessarily know, like we have folders here. So if let's say I put these particular tracks, let me go to the right project here. All right, and I have multiple folders. I'll take my 2 guitar tracks and we'll put these into a folder. And say our files that we had rendered. All right, so now when we go into our mix console, we could see all of our folders laid out for us right here. So if I want to see all of my drums, I could come right over here. Now if I hold down Shift just to the left, I could say, I just want to see my drums. I just want to see my bass folder exclusively. I want to see my guitar folder. Or you could just kind of pick and choose. Or you could have different configurations here. So you could say, okay, I only want to see group channels. And then we could add a mixer configuration for groups. So if I want to see all channels, so we come over here, you just say show all channels in my mixer, or you say, okay, I just want to see my groups. Or when we go to all channels again, we could look at our folders. Okay, so, and, so again, if we have everything organized in folders, just shift and click just to the left of the folder, or you could just hold the mouse down and kind of see all of your different tracks. So while it's not folders and mixer, I think you still kind of get the benefit, but again, folders can contain tempo tracks, MIDI tracks, signature tracks, all sorts of different tracks that aren't passing any audio. So let me know if that's helpful for you. Okay, so we see Rob just says, my chords on the chord track keep increasing in pitch. Is there a way to keep them playing the same octave when I move them to an instrument? Okay, so let me just jump over to a different project here. Okay, so let's say I'll have this activate the project. Okay, so once again, my chords on the chord track keep increasing in pitch. Is there a way to keep them, sorry, just got an email close out. Is there a way to keep them playing in the same octave when I route them to an instrument? All right, so now as we're have this playing through the roads, so those two G's, even though so if you run into where you want to change the voicings, let's say I wanted this to go up. I think if we come over here, let's go to the inspector. And I think that we could, at this point, let's go to the chords, and then we could go to the voicings. And here you could set the lowest. So if you select the chord track here, we could, whether you want to add the root note, the lowest pitch, lowest note of the chord. And then if we select the track, we could also come over here and go into the chord voicings as well, but check, Rob, to see if once you're here, that if you go to the voicing setup, that you could adjust the voicings for the chord tracks there. Let me know if that works for you. All right, so a question, can I delete audio straight from the edit workspace? What's the safe way to delete unused audio files from an ongoing project? Thanks so much, Greg, for sharing the knowledge. Cubase Pro 13. All right, so if I have an audio file here, I could just hit the delete key and that will get rid of it. And if it's not being utilized in the project, so we'll come over here, let's look at our audio pool. So we could just open up our pool window under, all right. So this is our future chill. So I'm going to come here. So let's open up the pool. All right, so we see future chill here. Delete. File will open up the pool. And we see that future chill is no longer there. It's been moved into the trash folder. So and the best way, if you want to get rid of the audio files that you deleted, is if you want to like quickly do this as a two-step process, you could just choose to remove unused media. And then that will remove from the project, put it into the trash, and then once you're in, I think it would be still a two-step process, that once you're here, you would just right-click, and then just as a safety, there's, I think, a empty trash once you have that open. So I will just quickly record. Okay, so we'll come here, I'll record on this particular track. Set the input. Okay, so we have our audio. We look at our pool. We'll see May 14th, 2024. So now I will delete those files, go to our pool, see that May 14th is done. It's now in the trash. And now I think we could right click and choose to empty trash. And then we could remove it from the pool, keep it on the hard disk, or erase it from the hard disk. So it's kind of a multi-step process just to be safe, so that you don't, accidentally delete Barbra Streisand's lead vocal, which almost happened to a friend of mine. All right, so we see from Nikki Zarin, says, hello, hi Greg, thanks for tips on how to set up the control room, very useful, and I managed to use it properly. However, there are some new plugins I haven't had the occasion to use. The vocoder. Okay, so yeah, the vocoder could be lots of fun to work with. So let's say if you haven't had a chance to kind of play around with the vocoder, so let's say we want to now come over here, let's take this vocal file. All right, so I'm going to just, as an insert, pop over here. And I think if we go to pitch shift, we'll see our vocoder. All right, so So as we kind of come over here, so now let's say we want a particular track to kind of take its MIDI. So say we want to take this particular track here, and we want to take the MIDI output from this. So we want to basically sidechain in to the source from this track. We'll activate the sidechain. So now instead of playing just one single voice, as we play this Rhodes part, that we could use that as kind of the input. So we want to choose external here. And then you could kind of play around with doing external MIDI. Let's say, and let's set the output of this instead of going to the instrument. So we'll go to routing. I'll just do a brand new track. So let's add a MIDI track. And for its MIDI output, we want it to go to the vocoder. And then you could just kind of use the MIDI track to play. So as you play your MIDI keyboard, anytime you just come over here. So that's how you could kind of experiment with the vocoder, but lots of great creative uses for that. Okay, so Rob asks, can you show a way to import several MIDI instruments from one project into another? I have a bass, a brass, and sax tracks made of Hallian instruments. I would like to duplicate them into a new project. Okay, so let's say I want to take files, let's say from my Schubert piece. So what you could do is go to import tracks from project. We will come over and I will say, okay, let's grab the Schubert piece. Once we do this, we can say, okay, I want the strings. We could choose to have the events and parts or not, or just the tracks. So now I'm going to import tracks from this project into this project. So I hit OK. It will now load up all the instruments and all the routing. So everything will be So again, once you got, all you have to do is just go to File, Import Tracks from Project, select the project, and then you could choose which tracks you want, and it'll automatically be imported to you into the particular project. All right, so we see a thumbs up from Cycling is Awesome, and a thank you. Glad it was helpful. Okay, sorry, my chat field jumped. All right. All right, so we see from Patrick, is it possible for sidechain inputs to get carried over when copying plugins to a different track? So I don't think it's going to automatically map. We'll give it a shot here. And there's good and, I think that there could be a lot of consequences where you maybe don't want it to assume that the sidechain is automatically routing, because I think the sidechain is going to take into account. So let's say I come here, I want this track, we have a compressor. Okay, we have our sidechain set up for audio 1. Okay, so let's get to the mix console here. We'll see our insert. So if I copy this over and we open this, so the sidechain is active, but not you'd have to define the destination. So, which, I could see arguments for either way. I think that sometimes when people copy a plugin, they may not assume that the sidechain is being carried over, since it is a different track. So I think you would still have to define it afterwards, which I think is probably a safer way than just automatically applying a sidechain when copying or moving a plugin to a different track. All right, so we have 808 King. It says, hi, Greg. I hope you're well. Doing great. Thank you. All right, so we see from Yash Desai, hey Greg, can you please show me how to delete the excess MIDI information that could be seen outside the MIDI regions? I have this issue when I shorten MIDI regions instead of using the scissors tool. Is there a separate setting that can delete all the excess MIDI and CC data? Okay, so let's take a look. I think I made a logical editor preset for this at one point. Okay, so we have notes and CC data. And when we come here, okay, so we come over here, we could see that we have these notes that are kind of orphaned when we change the length of it. So if we come over here, so see if I still have my logical editor preset. I think I called it like orphaned notes or something. Let me see if it was a macro. Okay, it's a macro, delete orphaned notes. Okay, so Okay, so doesn't look like that. All right. So I think we need to do a logical editor preset. Maybe that got erased. So let's say we want to delete. Type is equal to note. And type is equal to CC. All right, so let me transform, and we'll say that the position is all right, let me just try select, and we'll choose our position is beyond cursor. Okay, so let's say we have these notes. We've now shortened this part. I'm going to add this, so we're going to say transport locate selection end. Okay, and let's see if we could add this MIDI logical editor. So process our logical preset. Okay, let me just open this up one more time so we get the key command. Okay, so now we're going to add this in. All right, so I'm just going to have this event selected. So again, we chose to select all right, I'm going to choose maybe delete instead. Instead of select. Okay. All right, so you can see kind of our white orphaned notes here. Let's try this. All right, let me try. Try the logical editor here. All right, so if I have that. Okay, so I need to switch this Boolean condition here from and to or. So save changes as preset. Sorry for having to do this 3 times. Okay, so again, we want to delete. Type is equal to note or controller, not note and controller beyond a cursor. So I have these orphaned notes, and we'll say orphaned controllers. Now we could run this. And then those notes will, and controllers will, that are beyond a cursor, we'll do that. We could also choose to, if we wanted to split. So give that a try. So we can now just come over here and make a macro to basically take to the end of the event. So this will move the cursor to the end of the event, have this event selected, come over there, and then you could just delete the particular event. So give that a try. I think you can get it dialed in. All right. Hoy Boy asks, hi there. In other DAWs, there's always a gain or trim plugin that I can use to gain stage between other plugins so as not to clip going from one to the other. Can't find that in Cubase. So there's a number of plugins that kind of do this. So there isn't just a plugin that does, adds gain or decreases gain, but, so many of the plugins have a gain function. So if you wanted to, you could just say, any, if you go to like the Studio EQ, you could adjust gain right here. So, look for plugins that has output. Most of the dynamics, most of the EQ plugins will allow you to just adjust gain. If you're not using other parts of the plugin itself, then you're not going to take other CPU resources. But you could just use any EQ or dynamics plugin and don't engage the other sections and increase or decrease gain. All right, so we have Harry Dime asks, hi Greg, in my Steinberg download assistant, there are some VST sounds updates available, but I think I already have those. Is there a chance that it is not synced with what I have running in Cubase? All right, so if you look at the Steinberg download assistant, so most of the time, like the sound sets aren't updated as frequently, but let's come over here to the Steinberg download assistant, open it up. So usually, let's come over here. Let's say you go to like sounds and loops. So a lot of these, let me just find one that I think I have. So if you see the install again, that means that you have probably the latest version. So we come over here. So I have some of these are. So I don't have a lot of these installed, but see if it says install again. And if it says install again, that means that would indicate that it is actually already installed. And that you probably wouldn't need to do an update for the installation. All right, so we see question from Patrick. I would love to see a summing feature in the export menu so I could export multiple tracks into one. Currently it's either print track, buses, or single track exports this plus the solo button for selected tracks. Okay, so let's take a look. Okay, so you want to summing feature to export multiple tracks into one. Currently it's either print tracks, buses, or single track exports, the solo button for selected tracks. One thing that you could do also is, let's say I want to take all of my drum tracks. If you go to, without having to go into like the routing. So when we do like our export audio mix down, this is going to be kind of tied into the routing of the project. But let's say I just wanted to quickly sum all of my drums down. One of the things you could do is if we go to your edit menu and we go to render in place, we'll come over here to our render settings. And then I'll say, let's do this as one event. I want to include all the channel settings, the complete signal path. And then we could say mix down to one audio file, and I'll just say drums for Patrick. And now when I render, and we could include all the summing, all the processing, and then as we listen to this one particular track, everything would automatically just play back all my drums mixed down. So you don't have to go into the export audio mix down, realizing that is going to automatically follow all of the busing and everything, and it's really kind of follows the paradigms of the mixer. But if you quickly wanted to sum different tracks together, even if they're non-contiguous, you could say, okay, I want my drums and bass as one. Even though they're not routed into stems, you could just do an export audio mix down and have those files summed together like that. So consider that as well. So once you go to the render in place, if you have multiple events selected, edit to render in place, then you can just mix down to one single audio file and give it a name. So let me know if that makes sense for you. All right, so we see Pertti Komenen checking in from Finland. Thanks for joining us. All right, so we see from Robert Kunk, says, I often record drums when setting up the tracks. I use import tracks from project, then I select all the drum tracks from the project. Then select all the drum tracks from the project. I make sure that events and parts is unchecked. Since last update, it's bringing in track versions from the song. How do I keep it from doing that? Okay, so let's go ahead and I'll give it a try here quickly. Okay, so I'll do just a quick cycle record. On all of my drums here. Do a couple of passes. Guess I should do track versions instead. Let me just make this shorter here. Okay. Okay, so we'll do new track versions. Okay, so I'm going to save this project. Okay, so I'm going to close this project, do a new project, create empty, we'll import tracks from project. We won't import the events and tracks. Events and parts, we'll hit OK. So it looks, yeah, I see where the other, it's kind of saving it at the current track version level. I'll make sure to pass that on and I'll compare it to earlier versions to see if that did the same behavior, if the track versions were carried over. But I'll do some more research and pass that along, Robert. Thanks for pointing it out. All right, Patrick asks, are you aware of what I could do in cases of the invalid project file error? I only have a single MPR file and I can either open or import the tracks from it. Tried all Cubase and Nuendo versions I used. So if you want to, you could email me the project, but you could also email it into the Steinberg support if you do a support request form and include the project. And sometimes, you know, the support team in Hamburg, or depending where you live, you know, they could pass on Hamburg, they could do some analysis. But if you wanted to send it to me, I could see if I could open it on my end as well. All right, we see from 808 Kings, just says Ventura 13.66 works great for him. All right, Patrick asks, is it possible for the window focus to follow the mouse cursor? I keep using the wrong keyboard inputs when using multiple monitors as I quickly jump from window to window. So is it possible for the window focus to follow the mouse cursor? So it could depend on, like, you know, we could have, like, let's say if I'm in different zones, if I move my cursor here, this isn't the active zone until I click in it where we see the white outline. So it's not necessarily going to change the focus until you actually select something, which I think makes sense. But, so I think just hovering the mouse somewhere doesn't change the focus, and that could cause a lot more problems than when you intentionally select something. And when you select an event or select a window, then the focus is changed, but not just hovering the mouse. There'd be lots of bad consequences with that. All right, wonderful to see Spa Dogs from Canada on. Says, hope you're doing well. I'm doing great, thanks. And we see Lawrence Koch from Rhode Island from Barn Door Recordings. All right, Patrick asks, is it possible to deactivate the key editor solo or assign it to a different shortcut than the standard solo? Let's take a look. All right, let me see if I could differentiate it in the MIDI remote. All right, so let's say we'll have this as solo. All right, so it looks like the normal solo when we're here isn't applied. It's applied to the track, like the normal solo function isn't applied to the editor. But let's say so it looks like it's already independent. Let me just see if there's keyboard shortcut. So it looks like the solo in the editor is not tied to the solo. Let me try this command here. All right, let me check preferences here. All right, so we All right, so check this preference of edit solo, record in MIDI editor follows focus. So if that's turned on, let's see if that, yeah, so try toggling this preference again. Come over here to editing, edit solo, in record in MIDI editors follows focus, and see if that helps. I could do some more playing around with that. All right. All right, so we have Nikolay Zavetkov checking in from Bulgaria. Thanks for joining us. All right, so Mel James says using Chord Nano Control Studio with Cubase 13 Pro using Mackie protocol, when volume sliders engaged, they change the pitch of the track. You know, I would not run the, I would choose not to run the Mackie control protocol for that. So I wouldn't use that because you already have kind of built-in nano control into the MIDI remote. So it could be, I would choose to run it as the MIDI remote and not as the Mackie control. It actually, I think, works better under the MIDI remote than limitations of the Mackie control protocol from 2000. All right, so we see Patrick asks, hi Greg, were you able to figure out how to apply a select length of fade using a keystroke? So I didn't get a chance to work on that. I'm sorry, but I'll make a note of it to see if I could dive into it for Friday. Sorry about that. All right, wonderful to see Darren Flake on. All right, Roland Stuff asks, sorry, Greg, another question. You could ask as many questions as you want. Once I've tempo detected an audio track, can I set up hit points in the track to force a consistent tempo across the whole track? So make the tempo line straight. So you don't have to do it with hit points. All you have to do is, we'll just do a new project here. Okay. So I'm going to do a tempo detection on the file because we've listened to it now. It's not following. So we've done our tempo detection. And we can see that the tempo is fluctuating. So now if we want this tempo to be consistent, so let's say we're roughly like 112-ish or so. So all we'd have to do now at this point is we could select the event, come here to audio to advanced, and we would choose set definition from tempo. And what that's going to do is basically embed all the tempo changes. We could store the information in the file itself or in the project. It's going to embed all the tempo changes into the audio file itself. And now I would just come over here to the tempo map and say I want it to be perfect 120. Or I want it to be 140. So you don't have to do anything. So once you've done the tempo detection, select the event, go to audio to advanced and set definition from tempo, and then just change the tempo map to something that's perfectly steady, and you'll be all set. All right, so we see, can MediaBay automatically rescan folders for new samples or run scans in the background? So it will run scans in the background unless you have a preference checked. Under MediaBay, it says scan folders only when MediaBay is open. So if that is checked, that would prevent that from happening. But otherwise, yes, it would just continuously be updating in the background as you add new media. All right, so we see from Home Studio World, thanks, Greg. As a future feature request, can you please ask Steinberg team to include a direct key command to convert a single note to chord? Thanks. I'll pass it on, but it's usually pretty easy to do. And then do you want it for every single chord type, every single, so it could get a lot more involved than just making a simple major minor chord. All right, so we have from 808 King, Greg, how in the key editor to select all MIDI and then have it automatically give some random velocity, hats, etc. Okay, so we'll come over, let's add. All right, so let's just add some hi-hats here. All right, so we're all just playing kind of straight. Okay, so whether you're in a key editor, drum editor, concept would be the same. So I want to take this, get a MIDI to the logical editor. And we could specify just a particular note if we wanted to, or all notes. So let's say we want to transform, and we want to take type is equal to note, and we could also just say if we want it only on one particular note, and we'll say subtype pitch is equal to F sharp 1, and we want to take the velocity, and we could set random values between 80 and 100. So now we could just completely randomize velocities, as we can see here. So again, you want to say type is equal to note. We want to say the subtype of the note is pitch, and then is equal to F sharp 1. So now if I have other notes in, it's only going to affect the velocity of F sharp 1 and not the other notes. You know, we say, okay, I want this to be between 60 and 110. Now you could just randomize the velocity just of the hi-hats without affecting the triangle or the open other sources. All right, so we see Patrick. Hi, Greg. What's the difference between elastic and standard time stretching modes? Thanks. So the earlier versions, before elastic was available, we had our stretching. And when we went to our algorithms, we had the standard algorithms that were designed for kind of plucked instruments like guitars, drums. And then the elastic algorithms, which are used by many different companies for doing kind of real-time time stretching. We kind of licensed those from Elastic. So these are there primarily for legacy compatibility. So if you've used these on earlier projects, we didn't want to get rid of the algorithm and change the sound of your project. So generally most people would favor the Elastic algorithms, but depending on the actual source material, you may choose other choices. All right, G. Mitch says, hi Greg, is Steinberg making any effort to make Cubase more friendly to the blind? My blind friend uses Pro Tools because of that. So we have lots of high profile blind users. You know, Stevie Wonder being very notorious Cubase user. So, you know, one of the things that's, you know, also being you got to take into account is the ability of, you know, changing the key commands. Also the ability to, you know, run remote control devices. So, you know, using like the MIDI remote. So, you know, we could do this, but, you know, like my friend Greg Lukens, who's probably one of the most golden ears people in the industry, he's doing everything in Nuendo and Cubase. And, you know, he's a Grammy Award winning mastering engineer, does that. So we have lots of people that are using Cubase that are blind without issue. All right, so we see from Dave Fox, drum editor, duplicate control D does not do an exact duplicate, set length, eighth, set quantize eighth, record MIDI notes, select and duplicate, copy notes, start 16th from the last note instead of eighth. All right, so let's come here in our drum editor. I'm going to set up eighth notes. Let's do new project here quickly. Okay, so let's say I have 16th notes here. All right, so it could be, that you would need to use the range tool. So let's say, I'm just going to reread the rhythmic description. All right, so it says set length 8, set quantize 8th, record MIDI notes, select and duplicate. Okay, so let me just... All right, so this is what I think is probably going on. So if we select the events here and we duplicate the notes, that eventually, as we work with that we may not see, depending on the notes. So to get kind of an exact range, I would use the range tool in the editor and duplicate the range. So if you want, so again, select the range that you want duplicated and then just hit Control or Command D. And then that, so there's a difference between like the MIDI note lengths, and we could see this sometimes if we had, so let's say if I have this and I duplicate the notes, that it kind of doesn't work out within the grid as we would expect. So let's say I select these notes, duplicate, that it's not there. But if we have the range selected, and this is why they gave the range tool, that now we could duplicate the range and all the events within the rhythmic settings of the range will be duplicated, and the range is duplicated, not just the note events themselves. All right, Spa Dogs asks, can you recommend an 88-key weighted MIDI controller that works natively with Cubase 13? So they all will work with Cubase 13. Some people, with 88-key controllers, I think a lot of times the actual key bed, makes a significant difference in the feel. So the NI controllers are very popular. But also check out some of the Arturia controllers. I think makes some really interesting controllers that are worth looking into. Some people like the Akai. Some people, like real piano players, appreciate the Kawai for the action. So if you're like a piano player, if you played an M Audio versus a Kawai, they would have very, very different feels. So if you're looking for kind of a piano type of experience, I would always, for controllers, just, touch it in the store and see how it works. All right, so we see Watch Addicts just says, just to be clear, because my Mac is i5 processor, Apple has left me behind at Monterey. I can't install Ventura or others after. Yeah, I dislike when companies do that. All right, so we see Rick Show asks, in the quantize panel, use a MIDI clip as a groove and then add the velocity parameter going from 0 to 20% to quantize notes lose their velocity. Should this function use relative velocity? All right, let's take a look. Okay, so let's say that's our velocity here. Drag this in. Okay, and let's say we'll just do this as a fixed velocity. I'm going to set the quantize here to 20%. So you see that it did change. Let's set it to 40%, so where it was flat. We can see more of the curve appear. 60%, 80%, and then 100%. So it does look like, so it doesn't lose their velocity, so it is relative, you know, so if you want it to be the same, you'd want it to be 100% velocity. So if you do 20%, that would be 20% relative of the curve. So we come here, let's say we'll make it all straight, we can still see that curve. And as we do that multiple times, we could see it, the shape take over from the original. All right, so we see, hey Greg, can you show us the manual slicing option in the sampler? Okay, so let's come over here to sampler, control. All right, so I'm going to go to slice, turn it on, and let's come over here to manual. So I think at this point we hold down like the Alt or Option key and then click where we want to create our slices, like so. So you just click with the mouse while holding down Alt or Option key. So let me know if that makes sense. All right, so we see Watch Addict says I downloaded 12 Pro, and by the time I was ready to buy it, 13 was out, and the 12 I was running couldn't be bought. So if you have 13, the Cubase 13 license does work with, you could install Cubase 12 and run Cubase 12 with the Cubase 13 license. So let me know if that makes sense for you Watch Addicts. So you're always going to activate the latest version, but if you go to the Steinberg download manager, like we saw before, you could download an earlier version. So if you have 13, you could download Cubase 12 and then utilize Cubase 12 if you need to run that version. All right, wonderful to see Jeff Zabelski from Chico, California. Thanks for joining us. And we see JVI saying hello, and he's missed a few streams. He was on holiday. We hope you had a great vacation. Right, so Watch Addicts 2 says, so if I go to 13 Pro trial, I'm sure it'll work with Monterey. Probably not prudent to assume that 14 Pro will be Monterey compatible, was my point. you know, it's too early to tell. You know, we obviously, you know, Cubase 13 was just released like 6 or 7 months ago. So, but I would say that if 13 is running, that there's a good chance that 14 will run on the same operating system. All right, Jeff Sabelski saying hello, everybody all over the place. And JVI saying hello to Cubase family. Hope everyone is well. All right, so we see from Ness, hi Greg, can I use multiple outputs in Hallian Sonic? I saw on YouTube Dom do that, but I can't figure it out. Thanks. Okay, so let's just get to a new project and say we have, let's see if it's Hallian or Hallian Sonic. Okay. Okay, so we'll come over here. Let's add an instrument track. We'll do Hallian Sonic. Okay, so I will come over. All right, so we'll have, let's say, kind of our amped Electra. And let's go to a different instrument and say, okay, I want this to be FM Lab. We'll put this on channel 2. So now, and let's find maybe like more of a analog synth kind of thing. We'll go to Rasta and put this on channel 3. Okay, so if we want to send these two different outputs, I'm going to add MIDI tracks. So let's say we'll come here. We're going to add 2 MIDI tracks starting on channel 2. All right, so now we see we have amped Electra. Just try a different preset here. Okay, so we have this channel. It's the amped Electra. We're going to have the FM Lab, and then followed by. Okay, so now we want these to go to different outputs. So we look at our mixer, our mix console. As we select, they're all going to the same instrument outputs here. So what we could do is when we see for our multi-output instruments, I could say, okay, let's select channel 2, and we see that this right here is going to Hallian Sonic 1. We want this to go to Hallian Sonic output 2, and we want this to go to Hallian Sonic output 3. And we have 16 stereo outputs. We see that these have been added. So as I play, we can see the whirly sound is there. We come to the FM Lab. And I need to also go into the instrument itself. Sorry, that would be helpful. And let's just check the mix. And we'll say this is going to output 2. This is going to output 3. So now when we play the FM synth, it's there. We play back this sound. We'll see it come out. So we need to route it within the instrument. And then we could just come and see that's our whirly, our FM synth. And we have the Rasta all going out of multiple outputs from Hallion Sonic, but make sure that within Hallion Sonic that those instruments are being routed there as well. All right, so we see from Jeff Sabelski, just says, hi, Greg. I used the tone generator last week to demonstrate pitch and waveforms, including the noise colors to my 10-year-old oboe student, then demonstrate the beats when out of tune. Yeah, it's really, I think it's very powerful to see the visuals and make the correlation with what you're hearing as well. So it's a great way to teach your student. Kudos to you. All right, JVI asks, question, can you show how the chord recommendations work on a chord track? Example, I have 3 chords and I want recommendations for a 4th chord. Okay, so we'll add a chord track. Okay, so let's say we have 3 chords here, and we have 1 blank chord. Okay, so if we want the chord track to give us suggestions, we could just double click and we go to the chord assistant. Now the chord assistant can be based on, we want to utilize kind of the, we could utilize the previous chord or the previous and next chord, and it could give us suggestions. So we can see that as we look at this, it could give us different suggestions, and we could have this based on common notes. So we could say, oh, maybe a D minor chord. So we could do based on common notes, but we could also do it based on musical cadences. And we could base it on cadence. And when we see kind of the green notes, these means that these are more harmonically related to the particular chords. And then we could base it on different musical cadences. So if you want to do plagal cadence, if you want to do half or full cadence or blues cadences. And cadences, if you're not familiar, like a plagal cadence, I think is like when you hear Amen at church, it's like a 4-to-1. A full cadence is generally 5-to-1. So these are kind of like well-known kind of musical examples. But a lot of times you could just use common notes, choose previous and next chord, and then you could just kind of pick and choose, particular chords that may work for you. And it's okay to try stuff that's out of the box. You could also look at based on musical proximity. So if you want something like really unexpected, you could kind of go out of the extreme here. If you wanted something to be based on circle of fifths, you could also kind of rotate that and figure out kind of the harmonic relationship between chords there. So a couple different things to try. All right, great to see DJFK on. All right, so we have a question, how to correctly warping live drums by the click in Cubase 13 but don't lose the human feel. Thanks. Okay, so let's jump back to this example. All right, so let's say we have, I'm going to place all of my drums into a folder track. So let's say we have our drums here, and we'll do everything that every drummer hates is, so we can hear where the drums are kind of listen to fills. So like the snare fill was kind of sped up. So I'm going to do kind of a multi-track quantizing. So I'm just going to come over here. Let me just adjust. Okay, so what I'm going to do is put on group editing. Or before we do that, I want to find the hit points on some of the significant audio files. So let's say like kick and snare. So I want to set up my threshold. So we could adjust kind of our threshold so as not to include tracks that are bleeding through. Let's come to my snare. Adjust the threshold. And let's get to the hi-hat in this case. Okay, so now I kind of found like 3 key areas. I'm going to select group editing, which is this little icon. At this point, I want to go into my quantize settings, and we could assign priorities. So let's say the kick drum, I want to have 5 stars, my snare 4, and let's say the hi-hat 3. Now we could choose 2 different methods once we're here. We could basically do audio warping, or we could do slicing. So now if you, and the question was audio warping, so I'm going to come over here and we're going to create kind of our hit points across all the tracks based on the priority that we've just done. And we want to say, okay, I want this to be quantized to 16th notes, and we will say audio warp. And we can see that all the little sections have now kind of been warped. So we listen to it kind of in context. Where that was behind, and we listen to the snare fill coming in. So that's how you can do it. Now another method is not to do audio warp, but now we could create slices, and we could take these slices, and as we work with this, again, we would choose 16th notes, quantize. And this often could leave gaps between the events. And what we could do now at this point is choose to crossfade all the different sections together. So this way you can maintain kind of the natural feel of the drums, whether you want to kind of warp the drums to the grid or whether you wanted to slice and crossfade between the different choices. All right, so we see from the Mitch media-ke says helping in mastering. So let me know if there's a specific thing in mastering that you want it to do. It's kind of just a vague thing, but if there's something that your project isn't going through in mastering, and I'd be happy to kind of give you some tips and tricks. All right, so we see from VW or WW collaborations, there's an option to place a separate order on the left to separate inputs and instrument tracks, but I can't find it. Okay, so if we have tracks that we want, I assume this is on the mixer. So if we come over here to visibility, and then we'll see zones. So at this point, we could pick and choose. Let's come over here and say, okay, I want to see all of my input channels. I want my input channels to be on the left-hand side. So we see this dot in the center. So if I wanted all of my inputs to be fixed to the right and I wanted my outputs to be anchored to the left, so as we come over here or on the right hand side, that we could pick and choose between all of our different tracks. But you know, all you'd have to do is again just come over. I'll hide my input channels, but now if I wanted something anchored this way, we could just come over. So if I want my bass to be anchored to the left hand side, so just go to the visibility tab to zones, and then you could anchor into 3 different zones: the left zone, the center zone, and the right zone. So let me know if that's what you're talking about. All right, so Jeff Sabelski asks, hi Greg, which reverbs Cubase 13 settings can best match or emulate the onboard hall reverb I get from the onboard MR816 CSX? I love the short heavy reverb. Any plugin that emulates the MR816 CSX morphing effect? So I think with the other, you know, since you could run those as plugins powered by the unit, you could do that. If you have another interface, like another Steinberg interface that, you know, the other interfaces don't necessarily allow you to run the effects in real time, like the USB ones. So they could, when you go to access a particular reverb here, you could see like, so if you have one of the USB interfaces, you could actually just come over here and have the RevX reverbs run natively as well. I don't think it came with the MR816 because the MR816 was kind of sold separately. You know, it was sold with the ability to run, but if you have like a UR22C or UR22, you could get access to these particular effects. So you could have the RevX reverbs running as native. And it could be that, I'm not sure if they ever offered it to MR816 users, but if we come over to your dynamics, we could say that we have the morphing channel strip as a native plugin as well. And this may look cosmetically different, but it's the same functions. So if you know, by time if you bought a plugin to do that, you might be able to just get another audio interface and get those plugins with the audio interface. All right, so we see from inactive user, hi Greg, is there a way to change the routing output of, let's say, 4 channels at the same time in the mixer view? Now I have to click every one single and set the output, but I want to route all my buses to a new bus. Okay, so let's say I wanted to take, we'll revert this. Okay, so right now I wanted to add a group channel. So we add our group. And now I want to send all of my drums to this group. So I'm going to hold down Shift, select all the drums. We will come over here, and then I want to hold down Alt or Option plus Shift and change this. So all these tracks are selected as we see here. And I'm going to send it to Group 1. And now when I select, all of those tracks I selected are now routed to Group 1. So now the bass track, the guitar tracks are not, but all the drum tracks are routed to the same destination. So if you select multiple tracks, hold down Alt or Option plus the Shift and set the setting, and you could change the routing of those multiple tracks. So these I switched back to stereo out, and from there on these were set to group 1 if I want to change these back to stereo out. So Alt or Option plus Shift and change the routing. All right, so Paul Claridge says, Greg, your screen is showing volume sliders in a control room panel on the right-hand side titled Bass and Guitar and Phones. Can you explain this? Okay, yeah, I'm sorry I misunderstood your question on last live stream, but yeah, I think I understand now. So we see these are showing the cue mixes. So we go to our studio, we could say our audio connections, go to our control room, and I've right-clicked and I've added different cue sends. So I've added a cue send for a vocalist, a bassist, guitarist, and a drummer. So, and I've also added a separate headphone channel. So once these are populated in the control room, they show up here. And this would allow me to have a separate mix that's sent to a guitar player, that's sent to a bass player, that's sent to the vocalist. Maybe the vocalist doesn't want to hear the click track. You don't want to edit out the bleed of the click track through the headphones. So that's why you see those there, because they've been added in the audio connections control room as different cue mixes right there. All right, so we have Cornell sending greetings from the Netherlands. Thanks for joining us today. All right, Nick Hack says, hi, Greg. Hi back. Thanks for joining us. All right, and Nick Hack is joining from Houston. Hope you're well. My brother lives in Houston area. It says, I have a quick question. Is there a way to map the beat calculator tap tempo to a MIDI note, or is there any other way to tap tempo for the project via MIDI? All right, so let's say I wanted to do this. I'm going to just right click. Let's add a MIDI track. All right, so let's say, and I'm just going to do a tap tempo with MIDI. I'm going to tap quarter notes. All right, so let's say I've tapped in just MIDI notes, which are going to be, let's say, our quarter notes. So once I've done that, I think we go to MIDI, to function, we'll see calculate tempo from MIDI events. And we can say the distance of the notes was going to be quarter notes and hit OK. And then you could just automatically calculate the tempo that. So just record in like eighth notes, quarter notes, go to MIDI, to functions, calculate tempo from MIDI events. Thanks for joining us, and glad you can make it from Houston. Miss seeing my brother in Houston. I've been there since COVID. All right, Paul Claridge asks, Greg, is there a set blank chord marker on the chord track at all of my marker points? When transcribing a song, if I add a marker, I would like to add a blank chords to those locations automatically. All right, let's give it a shot and see if we can. All right, so we're going to add a chord track. And let's add a marker track. All right, so I'm here. Let's see if there's a key command to automatically add a chord track. All right, let me just see if this. All right, let me just see. We can do a macro here. Yes, I think you might have to click. All right, so you see the chord. Yes, I don't think that there is a command to insert. So I don't think that there is a command to insert the chords, but if you do have a chord set here and we want it to line up exactly with the marker, we could, just go to over here and choose. So let's say I want this chord to be lined up with marker 3. You could select the chord and then move to event starts to cursor. So you could do it kind of manually, but I don't think that there's a way to a key command just to kind of drop in the chord. But if I come here, and again, I could just use on the marker track B or N to navigate on this selected. I have the chord track selected. And then as I go to enter in a chord, we could just have that automatically snap to the position. So let's say our marker is kind of not on the grid here. But as we move the chord event, I could have that automatically snap directly to the start of the marker. But I don't think that there's a way with the keyboard shortcut to instantiate placing the chord at that particular position. You might have to just kind of manually move it, and then that would be aligned with the marker track. Sorry about that, Paul. All right, so we see, hi Greg, I have a feature request. This is Secret Studios, Jay. Could you please request that tools such as playback mode menus be accessible by right-clicking over the play button and similar for other type of buttons? All right, so I'm not sure if it's the tools. So if you have like different modes here and you wanted to see the different options, if we so let's say we go to the line tool, I could right click and then I left click, and then at that point we could see all of the different options that are available. So let me know if that's kind of what you want to do. But again, if you come over and select the tool, hover over the tool, and then hold down the left mouse button. So you're holding down the right mouse button to keep the toolbar active. Then you could select between the different tools. But let me know if, and I think that these tools are different functions than hitting the transport play. But let me know if that makes sense or if I'm misunderstanding. All right. We see Tim Weinheimer from Mission Viejo, California says, thanks, Greg, for all the 411. You're welcome. Thanks. Great to see you on the live stream. All right. Sorry, my chat field jumped. Okay, so we see JVI. Question in the chord editor, I say MIDI input. I play D minor in second inversion, D, A, D, F. But if I look at the chord, it says D minor first inversion. That's also what it plays on MIDI tracks. So I think if you did D minor, D, A, D, F, that's not the second inversion. So let's come over here to the chord track. Let's go to editor. I'll say MIDI input. So the second inversion. So let's say I play D minor chord, right? But a D minor chord in the second inversion, wouldn't it be F, A, D? So here we can see that it's a D minor with an F in the bass. So which would indicate that, and if I play A, F, or A, D, F, that would indicate, let me see, A, D, F. So, so the second inversion, since you have the D as the root note, that's why it's showing you as a D minor chord. But if you do F, A, D, then it's going to show you it's a D minor with an F in bass. So try that and let me know if that makes sense for you. I think my music theory is right, but it could be wrong. All right, so we see a question from Suede TV and Recording Studios. Hi, how do I copy everything when I have a divider line between some tracks? If I use a normal copy, all functions, it only grabs the audio tracks, not above the divider tracks. Yeah, so when you do that, it will kind of do a divide track list. So if you wanted to do it easily, just go to your project menu and just turn the divide track list off. Then you're able to copy everything and then just come back and turn divide track list on. So that way it's not going to be split into two different windows. Everything is going to be just in one unified window and not divided. So you'd have to just manually go to your project menu and turn on and off divide track list if you wanted to globally copy everything. Okay, so we see this is directed at Jazz Dude from inactive user. Is there a way that when I create a bus, automatically all my buses get routed to that newly created bus? Okay, so let's say I will add a bus here. So add a bus track group. Okay, and we'll call this inactive user. Okay, so now when I go to add tracks, okay, so this is our group, and I go to add audio tracks. So let's say I want to add 6 tracks instead of the stereo out, I would just choose to add it to the inactive user. And now all these tracks are routed to the inactive user group as they are created. So when you go to add tracks, you can just simply choose the routing, and that routing will stay until you switch it to another selection. All right, wonderful to see Brian Sawyer from Beulahville, North Carolina. Thanks for joining us today. Okay, inactive user asks, I want to create a pre-master where all my tracks get routed to. Is there a way to create a new bus, pre-master bus, that I can route all my channels to that? All right, so we'll just start fresh on this. I'll revert. Okay, so I want to take all my tracks, and then I could just right click and I'll add group channels, and we'll call this our pre-mix bus. And now all my tracks are routed to my pre-mix bus. So as you can see right here, a pre-mix bus, and as I select, all of my tracks were just routed to the pre-mix bus just that easily. All right, so we see JVI, question on the chord track. My song in chord track is in D minor, but the chord track says the root is in relative major F. How do I change this to minor? Okay, so let's come over here, add a chord track. All right, so we'll make it kind of nebulous with the Okay, so I think if we just go to the scale here, let's and we take off automatic scales, that we could now choose for it to be, let's say, D minor. So on the chord track itself, select a chord track. In the settings, just you could turn off automatic scales. And you could at that point just double click. So right now I can't change it. When automatic scales is turned off, at that point we could choose what scale we want it to be. All right, so Soren says Steinberg website says January. Excuse me, let me clear my throat. Steinberg website says that January 2022 news info was within 24 months we will stop supporting VST2. It is now. Any news about that? So I think primarily what that was is we weren't going to be supporting plugin developers that are making VST2 plugins. So VST2 plugins still work in Cubase. I think they will for a while, at least on Windows platform. They're not going to work on Mac OS and be Apple Silicon native. But it's just that if you were a plugin developer and you were reaching out and had questions about the software development kit, that is no longer supported. Great to see Gerald Ely from Martinez, California. All right, so Rick Show asks, question, can I layer two synths, both receiving MIDI from the same MIDI track and the same MIDI clip, but the synths play notes with 1 octave offset, i.e. one plays notes plus 12. Okay, so it could depend on the instrument you're using. So let's come over here. All right, so if I want to do something like in Hallian Sonic, I could come over, let's take an FM. All right, and if I wanted to take a different source here, so let's say I want this to be like strings. Okay, so right now we do this by default. This is on MIDI channel 2. If I put this onto MIDI channel 1, and then we could choose to transpose up this one sound by an octave. And if I wanted to transpose the FM synth part down an octave, so that's how you could do it easily, kind of inside of Hallian Sonic. If I wanted to do that sound in Hallian Sonic, I'll put these both to 0 and layer it with another instrument, like a retro log if you're using 2 separate instruments. We'll just load up a quick patch. Okay, so if I want this to be down, let's say down an octave, if we come over to, we'll see our MIDI modifiers, and here we could just transpose down an octave, and I'll record and enable both of these tracks. And if I wanted this as one particular track to kind of simplify the process, I could add these into a folder. So we'll say move selected tracks to new folder, and then we'll call this synth layer. And all I'd have to do is activate this one folder track, and this can contain any number of instrument tracks that are just kind of layered together like that. So let me know if that's helpful for you, Rick. All right, so we see from Achilles, hello, Cubase 13 Pro user, how to load for my desktop a preset that a friend sent to me. All right, so if we want to look at like user presets, so let's say we wanted to do it, I'm not sure if it's a track preset or, but let's come over here to your MediaBay. So we'll open up MediaBay here. Okay, so we'll scroll down to, just close this folder here. Okay, user content. So let's say, okay, whether it's a VST3 preset or a track preset, we can say, okay, I want to go to audio, and at this point, you could just say right click and say reveal in Finder. And depending on what type of preset it is, you could just drag and drop it right into that folder. So if it's going to be like a VST3 preset for a particular instrument, or multi preset, so again, just kind of right click. If it's an instrument preset, right click, choose reveal in Finder, or in Windows I think it'll be reveal in Explorer. Open that up, you'll see kind of the folder open up, and just drag and drop right into that particular folder. Okay, so we see, Greg, I can't get the logical editor to do random velocity in the key editor, not drum editor, just trying to set random velocity to all, not notes. Thanks again, sorry. All right, sorry for misunderstanding. All right, so let's say I have okay, so let's look at my velocity here for these notes. Okay, so we don't want, so I think it's going to be just like we showed before. So let's come over to our MIDI logical editor, and we can say type is equal to note. I want it to be on all the notes. So I'm going to remove the filter condition of just being on F#1. And then we could set to random values between 60 and 110 if you wanted to, or whatever values you want. And then as you hit apply, as we look at the velocities, you could just randomize just like so. So you could set the bottom value that you want or the top value for parameter 2. And as you hit apply, all the velocities will just randomly change. So let me know if that's helpful for you, 808 King. All right, so we see from PK, how do you replace drums, for instance, kick with samples and then render it in place? Okay. So I want to come over here. Let's go ahead and just revert. Okay, so I'm going to add an instrument. Let's add a groove agent. Okay, so we'll add Simon Phillips kit. All right, so I want to use that kick right here, C1. All right, so I want to take my kick drum, and so we're going to take this kick, and I want to replace it. I want it to trigger the Simon Phillips kick that we just had. So I'm going to double click on the audio event. We'll go to our hit points tab. We'll edit the hit points. This, I'm going to come over here. Let's adjust kind of the threshold. Okay, so when we do this, we'll see a little create tab. So we'll come over here. Let's create MIDI notes. All right, and before I do this, I'm going to select the groove agent track where we're at. We're going to create MIDI notes. I wanted to retain the dynamics. I'm going to put it onto pitch C1 because that's where our kick drum is on the Simon Phillips, and I'm going to select the first selected track. That's why I selected that track. I'm going to hit OK, and now the MIDI has been added. So I'm going to mute the kick drums here. So I can take this. Let's go ahead and just kind of and then if you wanted to just render that in place, all you'd have to do is select it, come here to edit, to render in place, go to our render settings, we can include and now we have our rendered kick drum. All right, so let me know if that makes sense for you. All right, great to see Randy Lee on. All right, PK asks, is there a way to quickly see all that's routed to a group instead of checking each individual track to see where they're routed to? All right, so let's say all of my drums I've routed to a group. So I'm going to add the group channel to the selected. We'll call this our drums. Okay, so I have a lot of tracks that are being sent to my drum group. So when I go to my drum group, I'm just going to come over. So we're going to select this drum group. We'll go to the edit, and right to the left of where we see the group name at the top, we can see 11 sources, and we see this little drop down menu. And here I could see all the tracks that are feeding the drum group. So all of these tracks are what it is feeding the particular drum group. So if I want to come over here, I can say, okay, the kick is now going, our input is mono in 1, it's going to the kick, and that's going to the drum group. We could now select, our drum group and just kind of go around. But once you have the group selected, just open it and just click to the left of the name, and then you could see all the sources that are feeding the drum group. All right, so we see, how do you make, the question from PK, how do you make the playhead to play from the start anytime I press the space bar? So if you just hit the period key, so if there's different transport modes, so let's say if we're here and my transport mode stops me currently and will continue on. So as I hit stop, but if I wanted to always go back to the start position, all you would have to do is go to my transport, and we will choose our start mode, and we can say return to start position on stop. So now when I hit play, I hit the space bar to stop, it returns to the start position. Just like that. See Jazz Dude's having internet connectivity problems. Sorry to hear that. It's always fun. I've been very lucky and fortunate with my internet access at my house. It says, oh, we had about 400 hangouts in the last 4 years. It's 2 times per week. Yeah, so I think we're at 390 or so live streams since COVID started. So maybe we'll do a giveaway for our 400th live stream. See, Jazz Dude says, time to say thank you to Greg, and we thank all your efforts that you do as well, Jazz Dude. I feel like I have the best co-pilot in the world on the live streams with your help. So we see from Brian Sawyer Sr. Hey Greg, bought VST Live Pro. There are no real tutorials for just promo puff pieces. Is there a way you could run through how to get started with using tracks? So I haven't had a chance to download the latest version yet, but I could do it and kind of do a quick walkthrough it on Friday. If you want me to do that for you, Brian. Sorry, I meant to get it over this weekend, but I forgot. All right, artist known as Love wants everyone to please hit the like button. All right, so we see JVI. Just says inversion follow-up, perhaps a linguistic thing, but in UK, D minor root is D left hand, DFA right hand, first inversion, D left hand, FAD. So I think it's still going to, interpret that because the D is going to be the kind of the root note. So I think it's going to, I think the first inversion, since the lowest note is a D, that it's, still a D minor chord because the root note of the chord, regardless of which hand is playing the root note, is still a D. So that's how I was taught in college music theory. All right, so we see Jeff Sabelski with nice words, says definitely a big thank you to Greg. I'd be a dog paddling in place without him, and the others like Jazz Dude. So. And Uno Memento says thanks Greg, but also to his employer Yamaha for making the Hangouts possible and thus taking care of all of us Cubase users. That's very nice. Yeah, they've been always supportive. I think last year it was interesting. I had about a third. I had a third of the views that the entire on live streams that the entire Yamaha American website got. So it's kind of interesting. It's interesting statistic. All right, so we have a question. Hello, I'm using Cubase 12. I'm learning how to make EDM. Is Cubase 12 by itself enough, or will I have to buy other sound plugins? So you could definitely do everything for an EDM track inside of Cubase 12. So, it's, unless you've totally understood every single plugin, every single instrument. But yeah, definitely you have enough in 12 to do EDM music and be very proficient at it. All right, see just a lot of love for Yamaha as a company. So yeah, they are a great company, make wonderful products. All right, so see more discussion from JVI. Says, what's interesting, if I drag a first inversion down to MIDI track, it plays first inversion notes. But if I manually select second inversion on chord track, drag that down to MIDI track, it plays second inversion as I defined. It could also be based on the track settings for, like as you drag chords down, check the MIDI track itself. And when you go into the chords, you could choose I don't have a chord track here, but you could check out the voicings, or it could be independent on a track as well as from the chords themselves. So the chord track can all right, great to see Gareth pop in. Okay, Uno Memento wants people to whack the like button. All right, so we see from Rick Show says, Greg, I met with layering and one with plus 12 offset was to play both of them from one MIDI clip, event track, edit and piano roll. Can a MIDI insert be used for one of the synths? So if you, let's see if we still have that project open. Yeah. So let's say if we have a MIDI track, one of the things we could do is, okay, we're going to have our MIDI track here. So let's say, and we could do this with a MIDI track, but not an instrument track. Okay, and we could say, let's go to MIDI sends. So I want to take this, and now that we have this connected, we'll say, let's come over to our retrolog sound. Okay, so, and now I want this to go to my Hallian Sonic, which is the two voices layered together. I turn that on. And then we could come over to MIDI modifiers on this one, and let's just transpose down -12. So now on one track, so I have a MIDI track, I have these two instruments that are here. We've now layered these on one of them. I placed the MIDI modifier plug-in, and as I record, and now this is all in one part. So if I want to just move it and make my edits, so that's how you do it all on one. So if you create a MIDI track to existing instruments, and then you go to MIDI sends, we could choose where we want the MIDI sends, and then if we wanted like this to also go out to Hallian Sonic, and I want it to throw in an arpeggiator as well. So you could do stuff like that as well and get very creative. All right, wonderful. See Graham Witcher on says, I'm still amazed at how fab Cubase 13 Pro is. There's no better DAW, in my opinion. Stock plugins, loops, and samples give you everything you ever need to make great music. So Jeff Sabelski says he saw North State Symphony Sunday perform a movie soundtrack concert, including Hans Zimmer, where the pre-concert preview with the conductor lamenting extra percussion hiring taking all the stage space. Yeah, I remember, I think when Hans was doing, like I was at his studio right before he was doing, I think it was Superman, he had like 10 drummers, 10 like really well-known studio drummers come in to record them just to get an impact. And it was like 2 or 3 days before, and he's like, this is either going to be the coolest thing ever, or I'm going to destroy half of my budget for the film in one session, you know. But he's like, if I don't really push the envelope for budgets, they won't give me more money next time. So all right, so we see question, you get instruments with just Cubase, where can I find them? For me, it's almost completely empty. When I first install, am I missing something? So yeah, make sure that when you go to the Steinberg download assistant, we'll just open this up and you can see all of the different available instrument and plugin options that are available to you. All right, so we're going to select Cubase Pro 13. And when you come here, make sure that you have all of these downloaded. So you have Verve, you have Iconica Sketch, which is instruments, you have Retrolog, which is a synth, different content sense, Groove Agent, Drum Machine, Hallian Sonic, which is kind of an overall sample synthesis player, Pad Shop, which is a granular synthesizer. So you get all of these, and some of these instruments just show up inside of Hallian Sonic. So you may look at it and go, okay, I add an instrument track, and oh, there's not a whole lot. But once you open up Hallian Sonic, you could see that there's going to be kind of a lot of different instrument sets here. And these could be synthesizers, orchestral instruments, all sorts of different instruments that you could have right there. So there's lots of instruments that are included with Halion. If you haven't explored it, definitely take the time to do so. All right. You see, he just says, "Oh my God!" So yeah, I was missing quite a lot. So yeah, definitely play and it says, "I hope they are free." So everything that you see in the download assistant under Cubase 13 is all free for you to use. So. All right, so I think we're caught up. Let me get to some of the questions that were mailed in. Thanks for all the great questions from everyone. See, we're at 99 likes. We'll get one more like. That'd be great. Okay, let me open up project quickly that I made. Okay, so the first question was how to record the MIDI output of a MIDI insert in real time to the project. All right, so let's say we have a retro log here, and we'll go to, let's say, our MIDI in. So a lot of times if we turn on something like an arpeggiator, now if I play a chord. Now what happens a lot of times is if I hold down a chord and record MIDI data into the program, now we do this, we could just say, so by default, it'll be set up like this, where I record a chord from the MIDI keyboard. And we look at and we see that we just recorded the chords, but not necessarily the arpeggiator. So if we wanted to record the arpeggiator, this is kind of a slightly different design in 13. We see this little line. And what this line does, we can move it down, and all the plugins above this line will now be recorded in real time as MIDI parts. So as if I played all the arpeggios. So now we look at the part, it's as if instead of just the chords that I played, the resulting effect of the arpeggiator has been recorded and captured into the program. So again, just move this particular line down and the outputs of the MIDI plugins will then be recorded. All right, so we had a question about not being able to access the other click. Excuse me, let me clear my throat. About not being able to access the additional click sounds in the transport. So let's say we go to the metronome setup. You know, we could just come over here so we see our click sound, so that if we play back our project, let me just turn this, get rid of this part, play back a particular project, we go to transport and we go to metronome setup again, and we choose our click sounds. So as we play, that if we wanted to use we would click use custom sounds, and here we could have different presets. So if you want like hi-hats, or now these may not show up until you click. You may, so as soon as you kind of click here, like if you want like a Yuri click, you could choose vintage spike, but you could just kind of select here. Now the only time that I saw where people weren't necessarily having access to this and for them to get it working again, so again we'll come over here to the click sounds, we'll use the Steinberg click. That what they did to restore those clicks to sounding was basically to go through and to delete their preferences, and then once they deleted their preferences, it tended to work. And one person had to manually delete the preferences folder as opposed to starting up with the preferences disabled. So give that a shot. Okay, another question. My question in brief is, how do I make an outboard synth get BPM from Cubase? I recently got a Behringer Neutron synth, hooked it up with my Cubase via USB cable, and the synth receives MIDI notes just fine, but when I try to sync the synth's LFO frequency with Cubase project BPM, it doesn't work. I've tried checking the boxes to assign Neutron as both MIDI clock destination and MIDI timecode destination. Tried checking always send start message box. I've tried checking pretty much every box in the project synchronization setup. Nothing helps. The synth itself is not malfunctioning. Am I missing something? Thank you. So generally what you need to do is you don't want to send MIDI timecode to it. That's probably unnecessary. But we'll go to the transport to your project synchronization setup. And we'll go to destinations, and for syncing up a synth with the LFO, we want to send MIDI clock. So wherever your Neutron is connected, it's probably a USB port. We want to just choose for MIDI clock to be turned on, and then at that point you may have to activate external sync. I don't think, no, I think we just go to the project sync destination. So now when you hit play in Cubase, Cubase is going to be transmitting MIDI clock. Now another big component of this is to make sure that your actual keyboard is set to receive and to follow MIDI clock. So if the keyboard itself isn't set up to be following MIDI clock, at that point, Cubase sending MIDI clock to it is going to kind of sit there and not do anything. You can get MIDI notes to it just like you describe, but you have to put the actual instrument to tell it to receive MIDI clock over its USB port or wherever the USB is connected to. So make sure that your hardware itself is set up to receive MIDI clock. All right, so we had some questions. First question mailed in this series. When you have the divider activated so tracks above it stay in sight, is there any way to lock those tracks in place? It gets a little bit frustrating to have them accidentally move vertically from time to time, so so what you want to see sometimes gets hidden. Why aren't there changes? Okay, so if we have a divided track list, and here we could have multiple tracks in our divided track list. So, the intention is not to have different, it's a divided track list. So if you have more elements than you have in the divided track list, then at that point, you're not going to, we don't want you to not see tracks because we don't want tracks to not be there or not play because it's not visually there. And we want you to be able to access all of your tracks, whether it's in a divided track list or not. So there isn't a way to lock particular tracks. I mean, you could be careful and say, I only want 2 tracks in my divided track list, and now we could only see so much, like as we work with our divided track list, I get all of my tracks will always be visible, and it's just kind of set up that way. So I don't think it makes any sense to not be able to see tracks if you put them in a divided track list. So there's no way of locking those, but you could think of restricting the area of your upper divided track list so that, only those tracks will be visible. But this way we give a little bit of space so that you could drag a track in if needed. Hang on a second. Okay, so second question, why aren't some changes added to the undo history so you can easily go back to your previous settings? For example, if you convert a stereo track to mono, it's not added in the undo history. There are also other changes that don't get added there. In the example, converting a track to mono, it's easy enough to do it on a specific channel, but what if it's 25 tracks you converted? Changing them back in undo history would be really convenient. So not every function has kind of like an undo. So if I, switch to a different speaker and I hit undo, we could think of the undo history as being tied to like mix console moves and also for edits. So, often when you're kind of going back and forth on a track, whether it's, mono to stereo, it's true you have to do one at a time. But a lot of times, people aren't necessarily, doing, adding 15 tracks and then converting it. You're kind of doing it one track, like as you're working, unless you maybe made a mistake. But I don't think it's too bad to have to do this all at once. I think that because you have the option of adding mono and stereo tracks when the tracks are being added so that you could add the right configuration. But not every single function is going to be undoable. You can change and toggle the settings, but it wasn't intended to just go back and forth with an undo history, since it's not an edit or it's not a move in the mix console, that there is a parameter change per se. Okay, so we see question, when converting tracks from stereo to mono or the opposite, it would be really nice to have all the events parts also convert in one go instead of having to deal with this in 2 separate processes. So there's a lot of times when you may want to have a mono track, and this is kind of how it was set up before, and people and customers complained about it, that if you had a mono track, you could have a mono source on the mono track, and then people would want to run a insert in stereo, whether it's like a mono guitar part and they wanted to have like a multi effect going on from, like, let's say the VST amp rack, like a stereo delay, that they could that their effects would be in mono. So when we do that, we want to have the independence of having a mono source on a stereo track or vice versa. So I think to have it automatically switch doesn't make sense, because I think that you would just, again, it's the point is to have kind of a different track source, and most people wouldn't necessarily say, okay, I want to take my stereo recording of a piano, and just because I put it on a mono track, I want the stereo-ness, the stereo recording to turn into mono. So you want that flexibility of being able to run stereo processing and stereo inserts on a mono source, or mono processing on a stereo source. All right, so we have a question. I've been having some problems with the mixer for a while now. There's been a few projects where expand sections exclusively is on even when I turn it off. I tried switching on and off several times and it still won't work. So I've had people kind of report that on live streams, and I passed it on, but I haven't been able to really do it myself. So let's say if we come over to kind of this project here. All right, so let's come over to our mix console. So let's say, okay, we have all these settings. So I want to expand this sections exclusively. So I haven't been able to reproduce this. So as I click there, it's only going to be kind of the one particular section for the whole mixer. But I pass it on when people had mentioned it before. So we'll see if there's any results that will change as a result of that. But it seems to be, and if I uncheck, I could now come over here, have my channel strip and the EQ both open. So, all right, so we see another question. Another problem I'm having with the mixer for a very long time, for many years. If I make changes to plugins, moving, copying plugins, and so on, I want to go back to a previous state. If I use undo from the mixer, unfortunately, there's a big risk involved in that, because quite often, but not always, if I undo something, all the plugins I had disabled go from disabled to bypassed. It's a pretty big problem for my workflow, because the plugins I've disabled, I know are more unlikely to be used, and some bypassed or likely to be used. In a big project, I have no idea which plugins were disabled or bypassed. So if this happens, I have to restart Cubase without saving and start the session all over again. All right, so this could be a good use if you don't have a lot of automation that's existing already in your project of using snapshots. But let's see if we could recreate this. We'll just do a new project here. Let's add a number of audio tracks. Okay, so let's come over here. Let's get to the inserts. Okay. So let's say we come over here. All right, I'm going to take this one, and let's go ahead and okay. So as we're here, let's say if I Okay, so we say let's undo some different moves. So this plugin here is bypassed. So let's come over here. Let's turn this plugin on. Let's adjust panning. Let's turn this plugin on. More volume. And turn that plugin on. Okay, so let's go through our undo history in the mixer. All right, and I'll just so it all seems to be kind of working as expected. But if you can recreate it, if you have it in a project that you want to share with me, please send it to Club Cubase at steinberg.de. All right, so we have some questions on Dolby Atmos. So let me just open up Atmos project here. Okay, so the first question is, how do I rotate the whole scene with all Atmos in bed and all objects when I have a rollover or looking around in a point of view shot example? The panner of the bed channel doesn't work somehow. So when we're working with the bed, and some of these limitations are just kind of imposed by the format itself. So let's say if we have our guitar and I have this guitar panned. So if you have headphones on, you should be able to kind of, let me just check. So you should be able to kind of hear this pan around if you have headphones on. Right, the back left, kind of rotating around a circle. So when we go to beds and we go to the panner, a bed in Dolby Atmos is really intended to be stable and not move. So when we go to the standard bed, you don't rotate the bed, but you would rotate the objects, and the objects themselves are what would navigate between different speaker configurations, and the bed is going to be more static. So you will have to go into each of the objects and do the panning there, as opposed to taking the bed and taking that entire bed and rotating the bed. So I think it's just the nature of kind of how Atmos is set up. Okay, so second question, how do I render channel-based output when I use Cubase's own setup assistant for Dolby Atmos? I want a binaural downmix. I found out that the assistant makes it impossible because it then uses a bus out, and that can't be routed any further or can't be panned or selected, so it's better not to use the assistant and make the setup with buses manually. So what you could do is we'll come over, let's listen to... And again, we listen to our file here. So if I want to make this into a binaural file, what we could do is we want to make sure that we have on our audio connections, we want to make sure that we have an output stereo out. So on my bed channel, I'm going to go to the sends, and we're going to route this to a stereo out. And as we do our export audio mix down, we're going to choose the stereo out. And we'll just come over here. I'll call this Atmos binaural. Let's put it onto our desktop. And now we'll just put it, create an audio track. All right, so, and if I wanted to, let's just go ahead and listen to that particular file. And we'll listen to it in a different player. So it's good. So here's our Atmos binaural. All right, I'm going to switch the audio outputs to this to go so you guys can hear it on the stream. So even now, as we just kind of play it along, we could hear it spinning around as it's playing back through Apple Music. So that's how you could do it. So just on the bed channel, route it to a stereo out and do a playback. And at that point, we could have this routed to our stereo out. I think we could just hear this particular track. But you could just, as you export that, then that's how you could do a binaural mix. All right, so we see question, how can I quickly add or delete an object instance of a track without having to go into the authoring panel all the time? So I think that the only area to do the, defining it as an object or not is by going into the ADM authoring. So as soon as we, come over there, that's where we could add and remove the objects. So, and again, a lot of this is simplified because the process of kind of doing this within an Atmos environment, was before we had the setup assistant. We were really kind of the first company to offer the setup assistant. It was like very nightmarish. So I don't think of, having to kind of manually do it. Felt like you were doing more computer programming as opposed to having to adjust it within the particular objects here. So you'll need to kind of do that. And again, that simplifies the process. All right, so we see question, can I use to replace audio and video function with the Dolby Atmos project? So generally not. I think that's restricted to the Dolby. I think you could use the binaural WAV file that we just created, but I think if you wanted to embed it into like a video file, that you would need to do it through the Dolby external renderer, and I don't think that's a function that's offered inside of the for internal renders without using the Dolby one. All right, let me jump back to different live questions. All right. find my spot where we were. All right, so we have a question. Cubase stops playing when I go to my web browser. How do I fix this? All right, so probably what you have to do is go to your Studio menu, to Studio Setup, and you want to select your audio interface here. You select your audio system, and then you'll see Release Driver when application is in background. So try checking that, and then when you go to a different program, the interface, the audio interface should work for that. You get it back to Cubase, it should automatically go back and forth. All right, so we see George says, here's your 100. Thanks for the great stream. Thank you very much. All right, Marco Pollux asks, what is the email address to send questions? So you could send it to clubcubase@steinberg.de. So clubcubase@steinberg.de. All right, so Gerald Ely asks, Greg, please show what you could do with the chords function in the inspector panel. Okay. All right, so let's say, so look, I'm not sure if it's, Gerald, if it's more for the particular chord track. All right, so when we're doing the chords in general, we could choose whether we wanted basic voicing, guitar voicing, and then we could choose whether we want more complex guitar voicings or we wanted piano voicings. And again, we could choose to have kind of rock, easy jazz, pop 1, 2, alter jazz, jazz with 5 different tones. So we could see all of those particular options right there. We could also see if we wanted to shift the chords early or later, if we want track versions on the chord track, etc. But let's say if I drag, if I select my Rhodes part here, let's get a project, chord track, and let's choose chords to MIDI. So now when I have this event selected, we'll come over to our chords. And here we could choose for it to follow voicings. So if we had changed a particular chord here, so let's say we go from D to A minor, that now we could have it follow the chords in scales so that we could, you know, as we change a chord that the other voices will change, we could have it just strictly follow chords. Scales, if we want root notes, there's going to be different voicing options, and when we do voicings, we could have kind of the voicings that are specified in the chords of the chord track, or if we come over here, we could choose to have those independent voicings. So we could have, okay, I want this for piano on this, and I want guitar voicings on another, and as we click the settings, we could choose the range if we wanted to choose the root inversions. If we want to choose, you know, different inversions right there, we could do it kind of like so. So those are some of the different options, Gerald. Let me know if that makes sense. All right, so we see, says, stupid question, YouTube and Cubase don't work at the same time even when I check in Cubase to release the audio driver. Is it because I don't have an outside audio card, something like Focusrite? So something it could be is maybe there are different sample rates and some built-in audio interfaces may not switch sample rates. So see if you try, if you switch the sample rate in Cubase to one that's matching perhaps what's going on in your other in when you play back, you know, so maybe try toggling the sample rates and see. All right, great to see Michael Pierce on. All right, Dan McLean asks, hi Greg, question, when adding a plate reverb for reverb effects and the vocal is sent to a group or bus, is this path has to be mono until the vocal bus connector with the stereo bus? Thanks. All right. Okay, so if we have our, we'll just jump back to a different project here so we can show this. Let me just load up a different version of this. Okay. All right, so when adding a plate reverb or reverb effects in a vocal is sent to a group or bus, is this path has to be mono into the vocal bus connector with the stereo bus. So, you know, a mono, you know, once we add, let's say our effects track here. So I want to take this reverb. So we currently have this going to a reverb, and I'll just kill that. So we'll just start kind of fresh with this vocal track.
What did you say?
So what I want to do, we'll add an effects channel to the selected channels. And here we could say I want it to be stereo.
And I'm left
We'll choose reverence.
for 1,000 years and a day.
All right, so I'll just come over here and let's bring this up.
The big event, I was your everything.
So the path doesn't have to be mono. So this mono track can go to a stereo group. It could go to the stereo output. It could go to the stereo effects end. So you'd probably want that to be, you know, if you're using effects ends, and if you wanted to do it as an insert, when you're working as an insert, you could just, and you wanted the reverb to be in stereo as opposed to mono, that's when you would click right there and convert that track from stereo to mono or mono to stereo. So let me know if that makes sense. All right, so you see, so Daniel just asks, so what is then the purpose of buying an audio card? And this is kind of in relation to the switching back and forth with between YouTube and Cubase. So obviously when you're recording sources, you know, your built-in audio interface, you know, may be able to play back and monitor audio, but when you're capturing audio, those audio interfaces will do a much better job. So that's what their kind of sole purpose is, to give you, like, you know, a XLR connection, so you got balanced line level input, so you got phantom power, you could have built-in DSP. And if you have like the Steinberg UR interfaces, you could have one audio interface where you could have a different output port that works for streaming, one that works for your DAW, and one that works for voice. So you kind of get three interfaces all in one. All right, Michael Pierce asks, question, when editing automation, if I add a new point, let's say volume, and then drag it to the right, is there a way to lock it at its current volume setting when dragging it left or right? Okay. Okay, so let's say our value here is minus 13. So I'm going to move it while holding down. Let's see if we do. So if you hold down, let's see if this is working as expected. All right. All right, so try just to hold down. All right, so I'm dragging this left or right, and it's staying kind of at the same value. So just, let me see if I get the, I'll just try one thing real quick here. So I'm just holding down a control key and then moving it, but you could see that as, and that's kind of, I think, restraining the direction. So if I moved it up or down, then it's going to kind of snap. So try moving it left or right so try moving it and then holding down. So move it left or right in time and then hold down a control key. And then you can see it looks like it's restricting my movement, so it's staying at minus 13 for the levels as I move it. So give that a try, Michael. Okay. Okay, reading through comments here. Okay, seeing discussion about the audio interface or real built-in audio interface playing on YouTube and switching back and forth. All right. All right, Dan McLean has a question. How to cut an audio event based on the first hit point of the event. Okay. Okay, so let's say we're here and we have our hit points. Let me just navigate up to like the drum part here. Okay, so once we're in the event, we have the event selected. I think we get hit Alt. So let me, so we have this event selected. We get hit Alt B or N to navigate based on the hit points. And then if you wanted to cut, at that point we could just choose to split and have that split kind of go, if you wanted to just come to the edit, you could, if we go to functions at this, let's see where it's at, but we could just choose to split at the cursor. So if you wanted to come here, there's even a keyboard shortcut for it. Come over here to key commands. Sorry about that. So just Option X. So if I just come here, we can now just Alt or Option plus the X, and then we could split. So if I hit Alt N, then Alt or Option X, we can automatically kind of split and navigate based on hit points. All right, sorry, my chat field just jumped. Okay, so just reading through comments here. All right, so we see, hi Greg, hope you're having a wonderful time. Sorry to be late question. What would you recommend to use if I wanted to stream my project? True Discord, there's an external program for that. So if you have like a Steinberg UR interface, this is really slick. Of what you could do is I could have, and so I have my UR24C here. So I could have my UR24C working as my DAW, but I also have, if I wanted to stream it to like OBS or to Discord or to other services, Zoom, we could take the audio output here from the UR24C, and we have a separate output that's just for streaming, and then we have a separate output that's for your voice. So with the UR24C, we can come over and just, let me open up the interface here for the UR24C. We have the DSP mixer, so you could have the mixer for Cubase and then a separate streaming mixer with different effects. So this way, one interface could serve as for your DAW, for your stream, and for your microphone that's connected into input one. So I think that's a great solution to work with. It's very simple instead of having to use really complex software. All right, so we have a question. Could you simply explain what we're trying to do in mixing and what are pre-inserts, routing, etc.? Sorry if it's too basic. So mixing, what we want to do is to basically, have our song play back, and we want the song basically we want to balance the levels. So I'll just revert this and we'll listen to it. All right, so we want to make sure that the vocals aren't way too loud, or if you can't hear the vocals.
You wished it all away.
All right, so we go to our mixer.
Left you.
All right, so we could have a pre-section. The pre-section is going to allow us to have filters. So a lot of times on our vocals, we may want to get rid of low rumbles and like breath noises. So we may filter out different frequencies or boost gain before it goes into the channel. Inserts will allow us to apply effects that are dedicated to a particular channel. EQ will allow us to boost different frequencies, and if you have like a home stereo system where you have lows, mids, and highs, we could boost these particular frequencies to make a track stand out amongst other tracks. We will have sends, and sends will allow us to say, okay, I want this vocal to go to a reverb unit.
You wished it all away.
So if I go to my vocal here, I could add more reverb. So if I do that, that's probably too much reverb. This may be really dry in comparison.
You were the
So we could just blend in like the effects.
I was your everything.
So as we work with these different sources, we have the ability to kind of blend all the sources together to make it sound like, instead of 100 different instruments, to make it sound like one cohesive song. See, Michael Pierce says he used to be from the EU. All right. All right, we see JVI needs to bail. Just says thank you so much for your stream. Thanks for joining us. All right, so we see Gerald Ely says he explained what I wanted to know about the chord function. All right. All right, so we have a question. Is there a possibility to have meters of time, minutes and seconds in a selected event? I want to find 1 minute, 12 second in my event, or between locators. Okay, so let's say I want to find here. So I'm going to set seconds here. So as my master time. Then here I could see like the start and end time. So we could say, okay, here's my start time and my end time. So we could just say, okay, my length of this, we could say, okay, I want to navigate the position. And you could say, okay, we want to go, this is starting at 13 seconds and 0.1 milliseconds. So if we just come over here, we could just navigate. And at this point, so we just I accidentally moved it. So we could choose our start and end time, but let's say on this selection, so we can see the length of this selection. There used to be little keyboard shortcut that I would have to kind of work up to remember. I'm not sure if it's still in the program or not, but if we set let's get a project. So let's say let's set timecode at cursor. So let's say I want this to be 0. We'll choose no, and then at this point we could change we could say let's go to 1 minute 12 seconds, and then you could go exactly to 1 minute and 12 seconds into that particular file if you needed to. All right, so we see, hi Greg, with the arrangement tool, after creating an intro, verse, chorus, how to move sections around to get the overall project to render out from start to end? Okay, so if you have kind of an arranger track and you need to render it, all you would need to do at that point is choose to flatten the chain. So we'll come right over here, we'll open up the arranger track, and you'll see this flattened chain. So we're going to turn this on. So we have kind of our non-linear arrangement. Open this and choose flatten chain, and that will now turn that into a linear arrangement that can be exported. All right, so with that, we are out of time. I want to thank everyone for all the wonderful questions. If you've learned a new tip or trick, make sure that you hit the like button. And we'll be back on Friday starting at 1 p.m. U.S. Eastern Time. We look forward to seeing everyone then. Thanks for spending part of your morning, evening, afternoon learning more about Steinberg products. And we appreciate being such a wonderful community. And we'll see everyone back on Friday. Thank you very much. Bye.